How many games have you logged with Dromai since the release of Dynasty?
Since the release of Dynasty, I've had around 250 to 300 games on Dromai, so I've played quite a lot of her.
And in that time, what was the hardest matchup to learn?
For me, by far the hardest matchup to learn was Guardian, because that matchup, it operates on a very different axis than the other heroes. So because Guardian can pop all of your attacks, you're trying to abuse the fact that they lack go again. So you're trying to build up a board state and break through their lack of being able to clean up dragons. But that matchup is very different because, first of all, your main deck changes a lot. Most of your sideboard is dedicated to Guardian. And also, the dragons that you have to prioritize and the damage that you have to take to set up a board is not very intuitive. So it took me a very, very long time to figure out how to play the Guardian matchup. And in fact, I don't actually think I even play it perfectly nowadays. So I'm always happy to test that matchup some more.
Yeah, and also imagine those games go quite long. So how do you deal with having rounds go up to 50 minutes multiple times in a day?
I don't have a very clever answer here. It really is just a lot of practice with the deck, and especially with Dromai, which I believe to be the hardest deck to pilot right now, is that once you understand the play patterns and what you have to go through, the playing the deck becomes a lot easier. So yeah, the bottom line is a lot of practice will get you to where you want to be.
And what was your record for the ProQuest season?
For ProQuest season, I played in 4 ProQuests and top-8'd 3 of them. I don't remember like precise records, but I know I was X1 or X2 going to the top 8, and I either lost in the top 8 or the top 4.
And what was your record at the Calling Indy?
At Calling Indy, I went 9-3, placing 22nd overall. I was 1 win away from getting that coveted top 8, but overall, I'm very proud of taking Dromai to a 9-3 record at Calling Indy, and I believe I am also the highest placing Dromai player at that tournament.
It's not bad for a vanilla Dromai list, right?
the big dragon supremacy for sure. All right, so first of all, the main point of Dromai, dragons, right? And we're operating under the central premise that if a dragon lives for more than 1 turn, you've gotten obscene value off of it. So the dragons are here to create a board presence and also gain you a little bit of life because your opponent has to attack into them. So that's the main way you're going to be dealing damage. Besides the dragons, we also have a few attack actions such as Command and Conquer and E-Strike, because to start the game, you can't invoke a dragon unless you have an Ash. So you do need some amount of these cards to make sure you're not Ash locked out of the game. So, and they supplement the dragon plan pretty well, especially if you suspect your opponent has a popper. Throwing an E-Strike is really good.
So what roles do Tome of Findal and Pursuit of Knowledge play in the deck?
So as expected with the Dromai list, most of your cards are red because you need to pitch them to make Ash. Therefore, anything that's not red is chosen very carefully. So Tome of Findal is unique in Dromai for 2 reasons. One is that you have your boot slot, which is Mage Master boots, that isn't taking a slot over something more important. There's no Phantasmal Footsteps. And 2 is you have a unique dragon called Chromai, which can generate action points. Now, I really like Tome of Findal in this list because it allows you to play that pivot turn that lets you play it out of Arsenal, rebuff your life, and then play out your dragons to create the kind of board state that leaves you in control of the game. Pursuit of Knowledge is an on-hit in a deck that lacks on-hit effects. So when you get to take the game long, Dromai wins more because your dragons accumulate value, but you have to get there by forcing your opponent to block. So things like Command and Conquer and Pursuit of Knowledge are pretty important in the deck to getting your opponent to give you some cards and slow the game down just a little bit.
So against Icelander, what cards and what dragons do the most in the matchup?
So for Icelander, something very important to keep in mind is they have a hard time killing your dragons. So generating that board state and punching through their ice is very important. There's 2 things to keep in mind. 1, they can kill smaller dragons from Arsenal to end your turn. And 2, because of the Bullander version, they have a lot of poppers too. Therefore, the best dragon in the matchup by far is Dromai, because even if it gets killed or popped, you get to continue your turn. So I prioritize setting a board state and then finding the crucial Dromai to punch through their defenses. And now you also don't have to worry about hypothermia anymore. So that's a plus. But against Icelander, it's just important to understand what your opponent could possibly tax you with and what way they have to end your turn. If you suspect they have a popper, you start with the smaller dragons. You start with the Ashwings. If you suspect they have a way to kill something from Arsenal, well, then you start with a 3 toughness dragon or something bigger like Azvali. Briar's a very interesting matchup because it's an aggro deck that's pretty good at killing your dragons, but not like absurdly good at killing your dragons. So the ones you want to prioritize the most are Rake the Embers, it's a dragon, and Yenderai, because the bubble is really, really hard for that deck to deal with. Third place mention goes to Azvali because it has 3 toughness, and the crucial thing is Briar will most likely try and kill your dragons for cheap with Rosetta Thorn. So Rake is good against them because they have to clear 3 Ashwings, and Yenderai is good because they have to throw 6 damage worth at Yenderai to kill it. And if you understand that those are the dragons you need to prioritize in the matchup, you can play this trade game with them and win a lot of exchanges when they don't have Channel Mount Heroic out.
And you actually had a good record against Briar at the Calling, didn't you?
Yeah, I did actually. I played 4 Briars in total in the Swiss, won 3 of them, and lost to Tarek Patel.
Not a bad Briar pair to lose to.
Fair enough.
Yeah. And then as far as the Guardian matchup, what cards and what dragons are doing the most there?
So Guardian's very interesting. You'll notice that most of my sideboard is dedicated to this matchup. The key combo you're trying to assemble is Miragai, which turns off Phantasm, and Passing Mirage, which also turns off Phantasm. Another piece of that puzzle is also Dust from the Red Desert, which can turn off Phantasm for Vincerakai. There's a lot of nuance here that I'm not going to get too in-depth into, but the general idea is if you play Miragai and Passing Mirage on the same turn, Guardians will most likely only be able to clear 1 because of their limited action points, other cards notwithstanding. So that's the kind of board state you're trying to assemble, and then punch through with a scary on-hit, such as Kyloria or Vincerakai.
For the Phi matchup, what dragons or cards are doing the most there?
So here's the thing. Dromai doesn't lose to Ninja. She loses to Massive Momentum. So I will have to say the best dragon in that matchup is Tumultai, but only if you see him really early, because 5 mana is hard to cast. But if you can blow up the Mask of Momentum, then you can have a pretty even game against 5. But that matchup is rough because they just have a lot of tools, right? You can't play out 2 dragons because then they hit you once and then kill your dragons to get a Mask of Momentum trigger. Hence, no Rake the Embers. Yenderai is good if they've used their Shuko, because Shuko's prevention clause gets around the bubble on Yenderai. So even their Yenderai isn't as perfect. It's a very hard matchup, and the game plan at Defy is just dodge them.